Number 10. The Star Child Skull. The Star Child Skull has been a spectacular mystery for decades. One main reason for this? The skull appears to have come from an alien visitor. The skull was originally found about 65 years ago in a cave slightly south of the Mexican state of Chihuahua. A teenager stumbled upon two complete skeletons while exploring the cave. One of the skeletons was completely normal, but the other was strange and looked as though it belonged to some otherworldly being. The teen apparently kept the skulls for herself and didn't pass them along until her death many years later, at which point they ended up in the hands of two American researchers named Lloyd Pye and Mark Bean. After much research, these two scientists, with the help of geneticists and other specialists in neuroscience and cranial physiology, determined that the Star Child skull contained a mix of DNA from a human and an unknown race of animal. In other words, the skull was part of some kind of freakish alien and human hybrid. Of course, the mainstream scientists want nothing to do with this bizarre skull. They won't talk about it, they won't research it, and even though there is a lot of scientific interest surrounding it, and many prestigious researchers have pored over the evidence, mainstream scientists won't touch it. This makes the skull even more mysterious. Lloyd Pye even claims that the existence of extraterrestrials visiting our planet can be substantiated because of this skull. As for the other skeleton that was discovered inside of the cave, it was probably the child's mother. It has been dated back to around 900 years, suggesting that nearly 1,000 years ago, an alien came down and mated with a human female. She then delivered a child, but for whatever reason, the alien left their bodies to rot in the Mexican cave, and similar experiments have either not been done again by aliens or have not been discovered by humans. What do you think? Are aliens secretly mating with humans? Number 9. Pointy-headed skulls. You may be familiar with the elongated skulls found throughout South America and Africa. But did you know that there have been similar skulls found in Europe? For years, researchers have been trying to figure out why there were oddly shaped skulls found in medieval burial sites concentrated in the southern region of Germany. The pointy skulls were first discovered in Bavaria in the late 1960s. There were 3 of them, each dating back to around 500 AD. The skulls had clearly been morphed, and it was thought to be through a process of binding the heads of young girls when they were infants. This created the weird pointy shape of the skulls, and while the method is pretty obvious, the exact reason behind it has been a little more confusing. Of course, skull modification was used for centuries around the world to show social status, but not heavily in Germany. This wasn't really something that happened in Bavaria. Researchers are now thinking that the pointy skulls actually belonged to brides from Bulgaria or Romania that were married off to rich or prominent members of German society about 1,500 years ago. A team of researchers from Johannes Gutenberg University analyzed 36 sets of human bones found inside 6 cemeteries, dating between the 5th and 6th centuries. 14 out of 26 female skulls showed artificial cranial deformation. DNA evidence from the male skeletons showed that they had blonde hair and blue eyes. On the other hand, the women with the deformed skulls likely had brown eyes and brown hair. This would suggest that the pale-skinned Germans were importing exotic wives with pointy heads from the Baltic region. Apparently, the Germans really fancied ladies with pointy skulls. Number 8. The Sonora Aliens. When residents were digging an irrigation ditch in the Mexican state of Sonora back in 1999, they found some of the first evidence on Earth of deformed human skulls. But the evidence they found back in 1999 was some of the most disturbing of its kind. Rather than finding the deformed skulls of adults or members of high society, archaeologists discovered the burials of extremely young and otherwise healthy children with deformed skulls, suggesting that this process may have been more dangerous than scientists previously thought. Many of the skeletons were found draped in jewelry. One of them had a turtle shell placed over their chest, and others appeared to be straight-up aliens. But of course, these Sonora aliens were probably just humans with weird skulls. The practice of skull deformation was practiced by the Chinookan tribes that span the northwestern United States to the southeast United States. And there were even portraits still around that depict young children going through the process of having their skulls morphed. Out of the 25 burials found in Sonora, 17 of them were children no older than 16. According to Live Science, this suggests that whoever was turning ordinary children into adults with alien-shaped skulls was not very good at it. Sadly, most of the children died because of excessive force against their skull. Number 7. The Skull Tower of Nice. The Skull Tower in Nice, Serbia, is one of the most fascinating and yet disturbing monuments left behind during an age of barbaric warlord behavior. Hundreds of years ago, piling up the skulls of your vanquished enemies and creating giant towers of doom was apparently the thing to do. And that's exactly what happened in Nice back in 1809. The Turkish general Hirshai Pasha decapitated the Serb rebels that he defeated and then piled up their heads to create a giant Tower of Death. Today, this is the best preserved example of this savage tradition. And for those who need a bit of history reminder, 1809 was right in the middle of the first Serbian uprising against the Ottoman Empire. The small rebel army went up against a huge force of Turkish imperial guards outside the city of Nice, and they lost dramatically. The rebel commander actually blew up a gunpowder keg, which killed a huge number of enemy soldiers who had started flooding into their trenches, as well as the majority of his own forces. In the end, the Serbs would have lost anyway, and so at least they took a lot of Turkish soldiers with them. But, in anger, the Turkish commander took the dead bodies of the rebels, mutilated them, peeled off their skin, stuffed them with straw, and used them as building blocks for a huge tower erected beside the entrance to the city. 952 skulls were used in the construction of the Skull Tower, and when it was first made, it stood 15 feet or 4.5 meters tall. And yes, you can still see it today in Serbia, though most of the skulls are now missing. Would you like to see the Skull Tower, or have you? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. The Cambridge Evidence. A mysterious skeleton was recently found near Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and it appears to be the first evidence of a Christian and pagan burial on the British Isle. The skeleton was unearthed by a British archaeological team, and she had been dated back around 1400 years. The remains are of a 16-year-old girl, buried with a garnet cross on her chest. She was also found with a leather belt, some polished rocks, and a knife. The research team believes that this girl lived between 650 and 680 AD. Nearby were 2 other skeletons, also in their teens, but whose genders have not yet been identified. Judging by the DNA evidence, researchers are confident that all 3 teenagers probably died from the plague. But here's where religion comes into play. The girl was found buried on top of her bed. Even though the wood had rotted away many years ago, the iron frame was still present. But the girl was also buried with a cross on her chest. These are 2 contradictory burial methods. Pagans would often bury the dead inside of their own beds, but Christians would bury the dead with a cross on their chest. Archaeologists are excited because this shows evidence of a slow merge from the ancient pagan ways of life to the new religion of Christianity, and it's the first of its kind ever to be found. Number 5. The Mexico City Skeleton Spiral. A strange burial site filled with bones was recently discovered under the streets of Mexico City. The bizarre skeleton pit contained 10 pairs of human remains arranged in a spiral shape, with their bodies interlocked. This discovery dates back 2,400 years, and it was actually made during a recent salvage excavation beneath the Pontifical University of Mexico's campus. There hasn't been another grave found with this many bodies from the pre-classic period in Mexico City before. Archaeologists have called this spiral burial the most spectacular thing found in the region since 2006. The human bones were arranged in a circular grave about 6.5 feet or 2 meters in diameter, and there were even some grave goodies inside the pit, including ceramic jars and bowls. The 10 skeletons came from young people, males and females, and there was even an infant and a toddler included. However, the burial itself is a huge mystery. Archaeologists don't know why the bodies were buried in such a strange way, although they assume it was some kind of ritual. What ritual exactly? Nobody has any idea. Number 4. The Lovers of Medina. One of the most romantic archaeological discoveries of all time was the pair of skeletons known as the Lovers of Medina, whose corpses were discovered holding hands. The skeletons first made global headlines in 2009 when they were found in Modina's Ciro Menotti cemetery in Italy. And while at first the world assumed that the two skeletons were a heterosexual couple, recent evidence has proved they were actually both men. Researchers working with the University of Bologna tested the proteins inside of tooth enamel found in both of the skulls, and they discovered a type of peptide present only in the bodies of men. Of course, considering these men died between the 4th and 6th centuries, it is impossible to say whether they were truly lovers or not. They could have been business associates or partners in real estate. Nobody really knows, but the skeletons are still fascinating since they were found hand in hand. However, Giulia De Rocca from the University of Modena has claimed the men were probably buried next to each other intentionally. Still, they could have been friends, or even just cousins. Number 3. The child and the bird skull. The mysterious bones of a child were recently found in Poland, and nobody is quite sure what they mean. The child's bones were found inside of a shallow grave in the South Polska Valley, and appeared to have been buried in the last couple hundred years, as his were the only recent human remains found in the area, meaning that the cave was not a regular location used for burials. So, the kid had likely been buried in secret, and, to make things stranger, the skull of a small bird was discovered stuffed inside the child's mouth, and another bird skull was found next to his head. Believe it or not, researchers have been trying to unravel this puzzle for the last 50 years. Despite knowing that the child was buried in the 18th century after dying at the age of 10, perhaps from malnutrition, nobody has any clue why the child was buried by itself in such a remote cave, or why a bird skull was placed inside its mouth. What do you think the reasoning behind it was? Number 2. Face down burial. Most people are buried on their backs, with their faces facing upwards. But in 2013, archaeologists discovered one of the weirdest cemeteries from the Middle Ages in Switzerland. Inside the graveyard, there was a body buried in a rather peculiar way, on its stomach rather than on its back. The skeleton belonged to a man, and he had been buried at a slight distance from the other bodies in the graveyard. There was a knife, several coins, and a coin purse found beside the body. But this is strange, because by the Middle Ages, it's believed that people were no longer being buried with grave goods in Europe. If the man had a purse on him before being buried, someone would have taken it. Even stranger is that there were 24 coins inside the purse, with almost all of them being different currencies. The man could have been a traveling merchant, but why he was buried with so much money, face down and basically alone, is still unknown. Number 1. Slaves in Lagos. In a rather horrifying discovery, the skeletons of enslaved people from the 15th century have just been found in Lagos, Portugal. The skeletons were discovered at the archaeological site of Valle de Garfia, which is located just outside the medieval walls of the ancient port city. They were found in some pretty strange conditions, with some of them even showing signs that they'd been bound at the time of burial. But what's really disturbing is that the place where they were found had been used as a dumping ground between the 15th and 17th century, and enslaved people from that time had apparently been hastily buried there with no care and no humanity. Out of the 158 skeletons found, which were identified using genetic analysis as being from southern Africa, at least half were essentially ditched in a shallow grave and then covered over. But what's fascinating about this is that the skeletons have given us a glimpse as to just how medieval Catholic Europe treated those coming from foreign lands, specifically slaves. Archaeologists from the University of Coimbra have explained that because many of those buried in the dump would have been coming from foreign lands by boat, they wouldn't have been baptized. And when they arrived in medieval Portugal and were already near death or had died on the voyage, the early Catholic people would have seen them as inhuman and unworthy of burial. And this is why so many innocent people deserving of respect ended up buried in a medieval dump. Thanks for watching. Which of these skeletal discoveries was the most bizarre to you? Number 10. Jars of Death. Deep in the mountains of Laos, over 100 different jars of death have been found across at least 15 sites. It's one of the most incredible archaeological mysteries out there right now, as although it's clear that people were burying their dead inside of jars as early as 900 BC, nobody really knows why they were doing it. Also, archaeologists don't know anything about the culture of people who brought the jars to the mysterious sites from all over the region. Archaeologist Douglas O'Reilly says that there is no evidence of human occupation anywhere near where the jars of death have been found. Plus, researchers from the Australian National University discovered intricately carved discs used as burial markers, with some of them placed face down. And this has only increased the intrigue and mystery. And to make things even more mysterious, the discs show various different imagery, from animals to geometric designs, with absolutely no correlation to one another. The jars that the dead were buried in are extremely large, often with enough room for 3 or 4 people. These are huge burial jars, and similar artifacts have been found in Indonesia, India, and even Japan. But the truth behind their significance remains a mystery even today. Number 9. Secondhand Stonehenge. New discoveries at the ancient site of Stonehenge have revealed an even greater mystery behind the famous Neolithic archaeological site. We already know that Stonehenge was crafted during a few different phases between the years 3000 and 2000 BC. However, in 2015, a team of researchers from the University College of London found that the infamous bluestones used in the construction of Stonehenge were extracted from quarries just over 100 miles or 160 kilometers away in Western Wales. Researchers then went to Wales and dug around to see if they could find any even older sites located near to where the bluestones were taken. They ended up finding evidence of an even older stone circle. And while you might be confused as to why this is important, the simple truth is that Stonehenge may have been used from second-hand materials. The builders originally constructed a site between 3600 and 3200 BC, and for whatever reason, that first site was dismantled and then re-erected at Stonehenge 200 years later. Unfortunately, researchers still don't know why this happened. Nobody knows why the ancient architects would tear down one monument just to build another. And to be honest, this has really just made the mystery around Stonehenge even more boggling. Number 8. Ancient Egyptian Brewery. The world's oldest mass-production brewery was just found in Egypt. A team of archaeologists working at a funerary site in the south of Egypt found a high-production brewery estimated to be over 5,000 years old in the first months of 2021, starting off the year on a high note for Egyptian archaeology. The site contained about 40 earthenware pots, according to the Egyptian Tourism Ministry. The brewery was likely constructed during the era of King Narmer, who actually helped in founding the First Dynasty and unifying Upper and Lower Egypt. This is one of the oldest examples of alcohol being produced in mass amounts for consumer usage. It would have been done with a mixture of grains and water being heated inside of the earthenware pots, with incredible amounts being brewed at a single time. But, of course, this brewery was probably not a public service to the commoners. It was probably used to service royalty and the rich, and the beer may have been used in royal rituals and maybe even sacrificial rites. Fancy drinks were clearly for fancy people back in those days. But you probably don't want to drink any leftovers that might have been left behind in ancient Egyptian clay pots, or you'd get very, very sick. Number 7. A lucky find. A German farmer became the luckiest man on Earth after he accidentally found an ancient Roman bronze horse head on his property. The archaeological discovery itself is quite fascinating, with the Roman horse head dating back about 2,000 years, to a time when the Roman Empire ruled much of Germany. But the story behind the farmer who found the head is almost even more interesting. It was first discovered on the farmer's property in 2009, at the bottom of a 36-foot or 11-meter well. After the discovery, the farmer handed the relic over to the state, who paid him a whopping $55,946 for it. However, after reading reports that the discovery was bigger than the farmer had been led to believe, he sued the government for ripping him off. This was, and still is, considered the best preserved Roman bronze horse head in the entire world, and the man ended up earning about $1 million more from the government, seeing as it had been estimated at a worth of $2 million. He got half, the government was embarrassed, and it was an overall positive win for archaeology. Have you ever found buried treasure? What happened? Did you get paid for it? Tell me about it in the comments section below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos just like this one. Number 6. The biggest dinosaur footprints. Scientists have just published the incredible details of a discovery made in Western Australia. It all started when a research project headed by paleontologist Steve Salisbury stumbled across the largest known dinosaur footprint that ever belonged to a sauropod. This huge footprint is roughly 5 feet and 7 inches in length, meaning many people can actually lie down inside the grooves stomped into the earth. There are other dinosaur tracks in the area, but this one is by far the largest. And judging by the sheer size of the print, scientists have determined that the sauropod that left it behind was at least 18 feet or 5 meters at the hip, which is significantly larger than any land animal roaming around today. You probably want to know what type of dinosaur left the footprint, but the truth is that the scientists aren't exactly sure. What we do know is that it was definitely one of the largest of all the sauropods, which were an amazing group of dinos that included some fan favorites, like the Brontosaurus. They existed all over Australia 130 million years ago. But what's really amazing is that nobody ever recognized their footprints because they are literally so big. They basically just look like puddles in the ground unless you're a trained paleontologist. Number 5. Oldest handwritten document. The oldest handwritten documents in the United Kingdom have just been found during excavations in London. According to the Museum of London Archaeology, they managed to decipher 87 out of the 400 tablets found, with all the documents originally being written sometime between around 40 to 60 AD, during the initial Roman occupation of the island. These were found at the dig for the new headquarters of Bloomberg, along with over 700 different artifacts. One of the messages simply read, "Therefore I ask you, in your own interest, not to appear shabby. You will not thus favor your own affairs." This almost sounds as if the Romans were trying to shape up the British because they looked a little too shabby for their own good. There was also evidence found of Roman schooling, as the Romans had undoubtedly brought their own education system to England. But the best part has yet to be found for sure, as more and more of these amazing documents are still being translated. Number 4. Indigenous artifact. An amazing archaeological discovery was just made on a beach in British Columbia, when a carved stone pillar appeared during low tide. This happened near the capital city of Victoria, and the Royal BC Museum has already confirmed that the artifact is an indigenous cultural treasure. Since its discovery, the museum has been working closely with the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations to determine where the artifact belongs. And according to the Songhees First Nations chief Ron Sam, there have been many artifacts unearthed in the area throughout the years. But nothing has even come close to being as amazing as this stone pillar. There isn't any concrete information about when the pillar was built or what it was supposed to represent, but some conservationists believe that the pillar may have stood at the edge of a cliff above the beach, only to fall down during a landslide and get buried. After a recent storm, the pillar was likely exposed, and that was when it was found by curious locals. Number 3. Ancient warrior. Archaeologists have recently discovered one of the most spectacular tombs in all of Greece. In fact, it was labeled as the most significant archaeological discovery in decades. A team of archaeologists from America, working with the University of Cincinnati, found an unknown soldier inside of a 3,500-year-old tomb. The skeleton of the unknown soldier was found with jewelry and weapons, indicating that he must have been a very important person. Scientists are saying that the man likely died somewhere between the ages of 30 and 35, and that he was either a raider, a merchant, or a powerful warrior. The researchers even found inscriptions in his jewelry that suggest he was part of an early civilization living on the island of Crete in the year 2000 BC. But just wait, this discovery gets even more incredible. The archaeologists made this amazing discovery while excavating the Palace of Nestor, a palace referenced by Homer in his epic writing, the Odyssey. It was allegedly a place where men made sacrifices to the gods. King Nestor was also the man who led the forces of Greece against Troy in Homer's other writing, Iliad. But, unfortunately, the great warrior buried here is not King Nestor. As of now, nobody knows who he is. Number 2. Ancient rock art. Polish archaeologists have just discovered some extremely ancient rock art depicting humanoid figures, and it is incredibly mysterious. The paintings were apparently created by an indigenous group from Southeast Africa, a group that has been around for 87,000 years. The depictions show buffalo heads, strange creatures that almost look like aliens, and other animals. The discovery took place in Tanzania, at a site at the Swaga Swaga Game Reserve. And the indigenous group I'm talking about is known as the Sandawe, and they are still living in the area to this very day. According to the National Post, researchers have even claimed that the Sandawe people possess the oldest DNA lineages. They managed to create this impressive artwork with a type of red dye. And the reason that the depictions have survived for so long is because they were painted on the side of the rock overhang, completely protected from flowing water and sunlight. While most of the depictions are relatively normal, the big mystery here is the humanoid figures with round heads. Nobody is entirely sure what these creatures are, if they symbolize extraterrestrial visitors, or if they're simply artistic interpretations of the local people. Number 1. Ancient mobile phone. In an obscure archaeological revelation, a mobile phone has allegedly been discovered in Austria dating back 800 years. Conspiracy theorists are claiming that the mobile phone was left behind by alien visitors, while mainstream scientists are denouncing the discovery as a hoax. And, to be quite honest, the mainstream scientists might have it right on this one. There has been a distinct lack of information on the dig, and even the pictures are a little iffy. The alleged UFO phone has keys with unidentifiable characters on them. It's shaped just like an old brick phone, and there appears to only be one photograph of it. These old brick phones might have been from the last century, but they couldn't possibly be 8 centuries old, could they? The truth here is that it's highly unlikely that an alien visitor to our planet dropped their cell phone 800 years ago. But then again, what if an alien visitor did drop their cell phone 800 years ago, and it became the template for our original cell phones? This is one of those archaeological discoveries that will probably never be proven and will remain controversial until it's eventually forgotten, or until the alien comes back to collect his lost phone. What are your thoughts on an 800-year-old mobile phone? Number 10. The Cobra Break-In. One of the scariest break-ins in human history was just reported by ABC News. The network shared the shocking video of an enormous cobra slithering up somebody's house and trying to break in through the front door. This happened in Malaysia, and the cobra can very clearly be seen in the video wrapping itself around the door frame and then slipping into the home through an open window. This new evidence proves that cobras are not just terrifying, but smart enough to get into people's houses. It's not clear what exactly motivated the cobra to invade a stranger's house. We don't know if anybody was home when it happened, and there's no information on why somebody was standing across the street filming the break-in either. Hopefully, whoever had been recording had at least had the common courtesy to inform their neighbor that one of the deadliest snakes in the world was slithering through their home. Lock your doors, close your windows. Is anywhere safe? Number 9. Rat Nightmare. There's nothing quite like seeing a rat inside of your house. Even worse is when there is a rat invasion going on within your very own walls. And that is the exact skin-crawling nightmare that came to life when a family hired a contractor to help remodel their home in Scottsdale, Arizona, only to discover a beehive inside of the wall, along with an entire platoon of rats. This infestation of rats was so terrible that the contractor actually asked the homeowners if they would prefer to sell their home rather than try to fix the problem. And, believe it or not, it ended up costing the family around $90,000 to replace everything damaged by the little rodents. Plus, they had to pay even more money just to get the rodents to leave. But here's the most horrifying part about the rat invasion. The homeowners didn't even know there was a problem until they broke open the walls. Up until then, they only suspected rats in the walls, and they definitely didn't expect there to be as many as there was. And this should come as a lesson to everyone, that even though you might feel safe inside your house, it could be crawling with flesh-hungry, disease-carrying rats. Number 8. The Angry Bear. It's not every day that a bear breaks into a person's home. But if you live in rural Colorado, there's definitely more of a chance that it could happen than other places in the country. One unfortunate homeowner happened to be the victim of a rampaging bear that broke into their house and then escaped by literally bursting through the walls like the Incredible Hulk. The break-in happened on a Friday evening, and luckily the homeowner wasn't around to meet the bear's undeniable fury. According to Estes Park Police, it was probably the smell of garbage that had attracted the bear in the first place. The police department even posted on their Facebook page that upon the officers' arrival, the bear reached a hole in the wall and smashed through it like the Kool-Aid Man. They also added, "Please do your part to keep bears wild. Bears are extremely smart, which means we all have to be too." And in other news, Colorado Parks and Wildlife reported that there were over 40 break-ins in the area in just a handful of weeks, including 35 vehicles and 9 houses. If you live in the backwoods of Colorado, you had better be sure to take your garbage out on time. Have you ever had a bear invasion? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. Number 7. The Cockroach Invasion. Welcome to the worst cockroach invasion in the history of pest control. This one makes me shudder. The roach job was done in the early 1990s by an unnamed exterminator, who referred to the job as the worst infestation of cockroaches he had ever witnessed. When he arrived at the house, he noticed something quite strange that he had never seen before. These were cockroaches wandering around outside the house in broad daylight. This was immediately shocking because cockroaches typically only come out at night, and during the day they hide in cracks and crevices where they can't be seen. Upon closer inspection, there were cockroaches literally congregating on the porch and falling out of the windows. When the exterminator knocked on the door, a young kid opened it and at least 20 roaches fell out of the door jamb. In the end, there ended up being thousands upon thousands of cockroaches literally infesting the house, with clusters of them all over the ceilings, the walls, the beds, the kids' toys, and literally everything else. The invasion was so bad that the children in the house no longer had their eyebrows because the cockroaches had been eating them at night. The exterminator said it was just too much. He tried to do his job, but each time he started to apply the insecticides, roaches would start raining from above. They even landed on his head, and he was constantly shaking his legs so they wouldn't crawl up his pants. He ended up leaving and never returning. It was that scary. But it really makes you wonder just how anyone could live in those conditions. Number 6. The Colorado Tarantula Invasion. In Colorado, residents don't only need to live in fear of bears invading their houses, they also need to live in fear of giant tarantula migrations. According to Valley News Live, every year in the summer, there is a mass invasion of tarantulas that move into the state. Apparently, the Oklahoma brown tarantulas travel to the area looking for females burrowed in the prairies to mate with. It's one of the more frightening mass migrations that happens in the United States. But Colorado doesn't seem to mind that much. In fact, the Colorado Tourism Board actually put a list of viewing tips together for the courageous people that want to get a closer look at the giant spiders. They say the peak viewing day is September 10th at 6 p.m. Luckily, tarantulas are not dangerous or venomous. They're perfectly safe, if not a little creepy. And, as a warning, everyone should also know that tarantulas migrate into Southern California at the end of the summer too. Nobody is safe. Number 5. Woman invades giraffe's home. In a weird twist, a woman recently invaded an animal's house. A disturbed woman broke into the giraffe enclosure at the zoo. She was greeted with a swift kick to the face. The giraffe stands about 12 feet or 3.6 meters tall, and he gave her a nice face lick before turning around and kicking her as hard as he could right in the face. And he, of course, had every right to do it, as the crazy woman was breaking into his home. She was technically a home invader, and she kind of got what she was asking for. The woman's name was Amanda Hall, and she was visiting the Henry Vilas Zoo in Madison, Wisconsin, when Wally the giraffe caught her red-handed. If you're wondering why a woman would break into a giraffe enclosure, Amanda said that it was because she just loves giraffes. Clearly, giraffes aren't too fond of her, though. According to the New York Daily News, the zoo staff said that Amanda was very lucky not to sustain any serious injuries, as giraffes are able to kick hard enough to kill a lion. Number 4. Planet of the Monkeys. In Thailand, an invasion of monkey gangs is causing mayhem and chaos. With a huge downturn in tourism in the ancient city of Lopburi, the local monkey gangs are going ape. These monkeys are used to being fed by thousands of curious tourists who are happy to hand out food. But with the worldwide coronavirus came the absence of tourists. Because of that, there also came an absence of food. And this caused a war to break out between two of the biggest street monkey gangs in the city. It happened in the historic center of Lopburi, where many of the most popular temples are. And while as of right now, nobody has been injured, the invasion of these angry monkeys is threatening the very stability of the 800-year-old city. And if you think this is an exaggeration, it's really not. The two gangs entered the town recently in search of food and got into a huge street brawl over a single cup of yogurt. The fight was so intense that traffic was stopped for 10 minutes, while humans tried to figure out what to do. With the food shortage getting worse and the 39 million annual tourists unable to return to Thailand, the war between the monkeys will probably only get more and more violent. Number 3. The Turkeys of Staten Island. New York's Staten Island is home for a lot of historical things. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the island is also famous for a rather strange infestation. There is a turkey invasion unfolding on Staten Island as we speak, and nobody is quite sure what to do about it. In this New York City neighborhood, you can see hundreds of wild turkeys literally roaming the streets, walking up from the sidewalks and tearing up the grass at local parks trying to get a bite to eat. And so far as the story goes, it all started with 9 turkeys being kept as pets over 20 years ago, back in 1999. The pets were liberated, they began to breed, and all this time later, there are now hundreds and hundreds of turkeys plaguing Staten Island. The worst part is that there have been reports coming in recently that the turkeys are getting more and more aggressive. It's only a matter of time before a flock of angry turkeys targets a daycare and somebody's kid becomes turkey soup. And there's currently a debate going on whether to harvest the birds and serve them at local homeless shelters, or if donations should be given to relocate the big birds. How do you think the turkey problem should be solved? Let me know in the comments below. Number 2. Giant hornets on the loose. In the United States of America, there is an unseen invasion happening that could have some seriously devastating effects on the local bug population and those who like to play in the summer sun. I'm talking about giant hornets. For the first time in history, giant hornets have been spotted trying to get a foothold in the United States. This happened in 2020 in Washington state, when beekeepers began discovering piles of deceased bees with their heads ripped clean off their bodies. This is alarming for several reasons, not least of which is that the United States already has a huge issue with bees, which are very important for pollinating crops so that everyone in the country has something to eat. And Asian giant hornets, for some crazy reason, are hellbent on killing every last bumblebee in America by ripping their heads off. Asian giant hornets, as they are properly called, are over 2 inches or 5 centimeters long, and have such powerful venom in their stingers that they can kill humans. According to a bee breeder at the Washington State University, Asian giant hornets look like something out of a monster cartoon, with huge yellow faces and great big bug eyes. Scientists don't know how the giant hornets have ended up in Washington State, but now that they're here, it would appear an invasion is imminent. Number 1. Swarms of locusts. In 2020, while the Asian giant hornets were infesting the United States, a plague of locusts, like the ones which the world hasn't seen since biblical days, was spotted descending upon the Horn of Africa. The invasion devastated farms, threatened food security for the continent, but for whatever reason was basically just ignored by the media. But the truth is that while everyone was sitting in quarantine, swarms and swarms of desert locusts destroyed miles of farmlands throughout countries like Kenya. And there were so many of them that there was nothing anyone could do except gasp in horror as the sky was literally turned black by hundreds and thousands of horrifying bugs. And in case you didn't think this invasion was all that serious, it absolutely was. Because just recently, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization said the desert locust posed a threat to about 10% of the world's population. And in 2021, you can bet that they'll be back. Which of these invasions scares you the most? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and check back soon for another awesome animal video.